started the Tall Buildings Fire Safety Network in 2009. As I said, we had some fairly informal events. And really, when I was pulling the agenda together, I used to do the CPD program for the Southeast branch of the Institution of Fire Engineers. And one of the perks of doing that, and I'd advise anybody to get involved because it's a great thing to do, was I picked all the subject matter that I thought my CPD was weakest at. So I got to pick all the subjects. Are you with me? So so the thing about organising is, it's a pain and it's hard work. But then again, you get to pick the areas and the speakers, etc., etc. And the same thing applied really for when we started doing the conferences. It was really the stuff that I was not sure about. I wanted clarification, and so we approached the speakers. And what became clear to me back in 2010, 2011 is we certainly had an issue with facades and cladding. And then we had the fire in Azerbaijan, the Baku fire, which if your listeners are not familiar with it, I YouTube it and go and have a look at it. And it is, for all the world, it just looks like Grenfell. The culture at the time is one that I borrowed from the aviation industry, and that's a phenomenon known as willful blindness, where if you're competent or approaching competent, there's a problem, there's a shortcoming, there's a misunderstanding, that there's a misinterpretation of some of the guidance, but because there hasn't been a big incident, then you all buy into this collective amnesia. And in the aviation industry, it's called willful blindness. And I think the whole industry was aware of that. We knew, for example, that nobody was handing over documentation at the end of a construction project. The 16B transference of information simply was not happening. We knew about the limited combustibility. We knew about some of the shortcomings of high-rise firefighting operations. I spent a lot of time talking to colleagues from around the world, and I was stunned at the amount of training that was going into wind-driven fires. And then when I was speaking to the UK fire services and going to conferences, etc., this was something that wasn't even on their radar as far as the people advising government are eminent people. And they've been in those positions for quite some time. And I think it's time for some different voices. I think there's some time for some different opinions who come at this from a different perspective. And I think, there's lots of ways that we could perhaps look at this with a fresh pair of eyes. Because it is a very small group of people that are advising government at a high level. If you think about Lakanal House and the opportunities that Lakanal House presented, and we weren't able to exploit the learnings to the extent that I wish we had done. I think it's probably true to say that we could perhaps be looking at this from a different perspective, because certainly we're going to be building a lot more tall buildings. The tall buildings that we are going to build are going to become more complex. They're going to be built out of modern materials. They're going to be fire engineered, so they're going to have all kinds of very, very complex systems inside. And so this problem is not getting simpler, it's getting more complex. What we have to accept is that multi-fatality fires in high-rise buildings are very low probability events, but they're very high consequence events. So normally when we're doing a risk assessment, we use a symmetrical grid, a 5x5, a 6x6, hazard against, so consequence against probability. These types of fires don't fit that model because they are very low probability. They don't happen very often, but when they do happen, we're going to kill a lot of people. I did a tour around Australia and I spent a reasonable amount of time in the States. In some quarters in the United States, we're a laughing stock, and that hurts. That absolutely cuts to the bone when people are saying, "Well, why didn't you? How did this happen? How did you allow this to happen? How did How did 72 people die in a modern city in London? To the extent that they did. I was lucky enough to spend some time with the fire service in Sao Paulo in Brazil, where in the 70s there were a number of very high-profile multi-fatality fires, and they have very stringent powers. They can enter any premise, including private residence, with due cause. They can arrest people. They can empty buildings and empty buildings at. If they think it's an unsafe building, they can just say, right, everybody out now, and they can empty the building out. And that's based on their experience. But you're looking at Sao Paulo, that's a city with, 32 million people in it? And when I visited it and looked out of the window, it's just a forest of tall buildings. The biggest cause of fire in high-rise buildings is electricity. And we spend the least amount of time on trying to resolve issues with electrical equipment, portable electrical equipment, etc., in buildings. And this fire was started by a portable electrical heater. It was obviously in the winter in New York. And we think about Lacanau House, which was a television set. So, misuse of and continued use of damaged, obsolete, dangerous electrical equipment, whatever it might be, is the big one, which is when I'm teaching on my course, Tall Buildings Fire Safety Management course, we say to people, what steps have you got to try and address the issue of electrical fires? We used to pat test, portable appliance test everything. We used to sheet dip everything. We don't do that anymore, and certainly we don't do it in private dwellings. So it's really, really important that anybody that's tasked with fire safety management in a building has to understand that electricity is the biggest cause of fire. So the question I would say to people is, well, what are you doing about that? Because there's lots of people who want to talk about self-closers on doors and extinguishers and barbecues on balconies and all the other things that we have to do. But the biggest cause of fire is electricity. One of the skills that I've learned is the use of thermography, not for firefighting now. This is thermographic surveys to detect early indications of electrical component failure. So I've got a thermal imaging camera now, and they retail at about £250. You can actually get a device now to attach to your mobile phone that will turn your mobile phone into a thermal imaging camera. We use this in the construction industry for monitoring hot work when it's in progress. So I'm advocating now, and I certainly during my training, I advocate people now, get yourself a thermal imaging camera, use it when you're going around looking at electrical equipment and see if stuff is overheating. And certainly now the big buildings, the big towers in London, they're mandated by their insurers now to do a compulsory thermographic survey, where they'll come around and look at your wiring systems, your connections and stuff like that. Getting into the hotel room after a long journey, straight to the minibar, straight to the closet to hang my clothes up, and open the closet, and what's inside the closet in every hotel I stayed in, 2 smoke hoods and a torch. In every hotel in China. So smoke hoods are commonplace in many parts of the world, including Japan, and the use of smoke hoods. Now, of course, they are only filtration systems, but what my colleagues in the fire service are telling me at the moment now, because smoke hoods have been deployed now around the country, is that they're using them regularly. The occupants seem to respond well when you knock on the door. I mean, can you imagine knocking on the door in BA, breathing on BA, and Mrs. Miggins, 88, answers the door, and you're standing there like Darth Vader saying, follow me down the stairs. So I think we're moving to a position where if the major manufacturers can get the cost unit price down to about the equivalent of a good quality cycle helmet, I think you're going to see a lot of people in high-rise buying smoke hoods. I've got a distinct view on the 2-staircase issue. I've been in the fire press recently giving my view. We've had several eminent people come out now and say that the 2-staircase requirement is an overreaction. No, actually, there's some pretty senior, pretty serious, and people I respect, fire engineers, who are saying that it's a simplistic answer. I commend anybody, have a look at the article that I wrote recently about some of the issues why I'm thinking that there has to be some designed contingency. I used the words redundancy, and that got up a lot of people's noses when I said that. But one of the telling, when I went to FDIC, I was attending and I sat in a lecture on a high-rise from a guy from Las Vegas, fire chief from Las Vegas. And he said something that really shocked me. He said, when we go out to fight fires in buildings, we expect 100% failure of the building systems. That's our planning assumption. 100% of the building systems will not work. We're offering a 75% discount to serving firefighters to attend on the delegate rate. So, you have to shake the money tree to get your backside over there. But if you haven't been to FDIC before, I would say to you that it's a once in a career bucket list thing. There's 40,000 firefighters in Indianapolis during the course of that week. If you haven't been to it, it's just extraordinary. And I would commend it. Obviously, I've got a vested interest, but I would commend it to you just as a thing to go to a city where there's 40,000 firefighters, streets blocked off, bagpipe bands, bars everywhere. That's not the reason for going, clearly, but it's not a bad add-on. The serious point, Pete, to be frank, is one of the criticisms that was levelled at London Fire Brigade was a sense of sort of insular parochialism, and we have to. I think for our the people we serve and would expect us to have an open mind and go and have an active curiosity. Rigorously enforcing the donning and startup at the bridgehead to go into the search zone is so task limiting. Relatively speaking, fresh air, you're knocking on the door and you've got an occupant in there you're asking to leave and you're donned in BA, you can't talk to them, you can't make proper eye contact with them. I just think that it's I know why the FBU are taking the position they are, and they're doing what they think is the right thing. I think the question has to be asked now is, does the new technology make a difference? Is it reliable? Is it consistent? And should we use it? And if the answer to that is yes, then I think the time is right for, in these circumstances, self-management is a viable option. I've been absolutely drummed into me when I was doing my basic training about BA procedures. Stage 1, stage 2 and all that stuff, and it was kind of, absolutely you will not transgress this. It is the holy grail of breathing, because Gillinder Street and all of those tragic incidents in the past which had given us that. What I've come to realise, having spent some time as I have around the world talking to people, is that we're in a much different place now. If you look at the kit now that we're deploying, the monitoring systems that are now on a BA board, I think we're in a different place, and I honestly believe that sending people into the search zone above the fire floor on air is going to render them, their effectiveness is going to be so short. I just think the technology's changed. In the recent years, I, along with some other colleagues, have trained the Malta Fire Service in high-rise firefighting operations, which culminated in a couple of large-scale exercises, and they've got some great kit now that they put straight into the stairwell on a number of floors, which is atmosphere monitoring, fixed atmosphere monitoring. So I think the state of the art has moved on.